from UNESCO's perspective, the ethical internet should acknowledge differences while still crucially remaining within wider framework of universal human rights. Nowadays, what is the situation? Ethical choices are informed by actors' beliefs and values rather than necessarily by issues of law and regulation. That means the role of education there is crucial. This is why the media and information literacy programs and schemes must be further developed and to some extent imposed on young people. This may need to evolve, and UNESCO considers that human rights as the appropriate basis for assessing the ethical content of decisions and their expected outcomes, norms, beliefs, and values. As a consequence, such reflection should inform the development of regulatory, maybe compulsory, and statutory standards. Embracing the coherent ethical guidelines is essential, and I think also for SEEDS countries, in face of the increasing globalization. The definition and adoption of best practices and voluntary, self-regulatory, professional and ethical guidelines should be then encouraged among media professionals, information producers, users and service providers with due respect, of course, to freedom of expression.
Today, information literacy is, we can say, almost like, it's just as vital as reading, writing, and arithmetic was 20, 30 years ago. I mean, of course, those skills are still important, but in today's information society, it's really essential that people have the skills not only to consume content, but also to create content. And it's not just enough to create content. You need to operate in this environment in a safe way, protecting your privacy, respecting others, and again, avoiding so many problems that can sometimes pop up.
We have been hearing a lot about the policing of internet and the prevention of the unethical use, the ensurance that our youth are using the internet safely. I think that Attorney General Honorable Vincent Byron would have even spoken about a Stay Safe online program. My question is basically, how do we set the precedent? At what point, when is intervention going to take place? When does the right to ensure safety trump the right to privacy that our young people would have? What is the national policy? How does it translate to the education system and in terms of teachers' rights and responsibilities in intervening?
What I can say is that I think that the information and media literacy schemes must be applied as soon as possible. Now we see that there are 4 to 5 years old kids already using tablets, using smartphone, etc. There are two levels of intervention. The first level, of course, is the institutional one. And there about the privacy, about the ethical codes, each government will have its own view. And I myself, I was extremely satisfied to hear this morning in the presentation by the Attorney General that St. Kitts and Nevis is starting to plan for the adoption of a code of ethics. And I can tell you that this is a very important step forward, and in your folders you have an example of an existing code of ethics. Please review this code of ethics, because not only because it's something that I worked on, but it took 5 years to produce it. So imagine the challenges at stake. We started in a regional event in Santo Domingo with the first draft in 2006, and it took exactly 5 years to reach this text. Member states are extremely cautious as to what can be imposed or suggested in the field of information ethics. There are huge challenges in this respect, and this is why this will be an issue that each and every government will deal separately according to their priorities. Thank you.
think when I came in, you mentioned somebody had taken their computer to an IT professional, and I use that term in quotes, and they accessed and published images. While I'm not advocating the publishing of the images, I'm mindful that in the UK there was a celebrity, I think, who took some photos or took a device, and some inappropriate and illicit photos were found on that device, and the police were called for them. So when we're planning these kinds of legislation, are we mindful that there may be persons engaged in inappropriate and illegal activity? How do we treat with that in terms of, see something, say something, or if you suspect something, that the legislation we talk about with child protection and so forth. So is somebody who sees something like that bound to report, or are they, or if they do report, are they going to be, what's the consequences basically? So when we're planning legislation, do we allow and cater for those things?
So if you're going through a phone and you see child pornography, then you would report it, to the police. I know that there are laws, against child pornography, and it would be dealt with under those laws.
So you'd be treated as a whistleblower in that case, so you'd be exempt from any consequences for invasion of privacy, etc., those kind of ramifications. That's the essential point I'm trying to get to.
Well, for the countries with that law, I guess it would come under that law. Unfortunately, we do not have that in Dominica.
I think that's a very interesting question. Does anyone here have experiences relative to that?
I think one of the issues which must be addressed, particularly when you are talking about cybercrime legislation, misuse and abuse of computers, one of the workshops I attended, organized by HIPICA, what came out in some of those workshops were that some police officers did not have the skills to deal with those matters. And so it was recommended that there should be created a special unit in the police force to be trained and acquire the necessary skills in order to deal with that situation. So I don't know how other countries have dealt with it.
I don't know how many persons are aware. Sorry. Travis Henry, Wallace and Christopher Nevis Police Force, Cybercrime Unit. About 5 years ago, a unit was created to deal with cybercrime. And we had various training, both regional and international. But I guess the question was, what happens to the person who is fixing the phone and makes a report? Because the question is from Russell. Yes. We're trying to ask what happens to the person who makes a report? Yeah. Okay. But there is a cybercrime unit in the Wallace and Christopher Nevis Police Force that deal with cybercrime.
What happens?
No, the data protection that's not ours. That's not our task. We deal with the child pornography. You understand? So he would have to answer that.
My task was to talk about cyberbullying. I tried to bring into the perspective of the Caribbean, because that's what we live in, and especially the OECS. I'll touch on some challenges, causes, but I'll also heavily focus on solutions, because we tend to talk about all the problems and challenges, which we know what they are, but we hardly focus on solutions. In a recent study done by Vodafone, it shows that 1 in 5 young people have been cyberbullied. And this was done across 11 countries. Here is an example of cyberbullying. So what I did, I actually spent the last 2 weeks just asking young people, well, both young and older people, exactly how they feel about cyberbullying, just to get a sense here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And what I found out was a lot of persons don't even know what the hell cyberbullying is. There seems to be, and that is the first and fundamental problem, is we don't, as a society, understand what cyberbullying is. Therefore, it's not seen as an issue. However, there are some examples of cyberbullying that are already occurring, but no one classifies it as such. So here's an example. Someone writes on someone's Facebook wall, "You ugly cow, stay away from my boyfriend." Now, I have seen on Facebook, on some pages, and a few of my friends would show me some examples of this, or even worse, with some colorful, more colorful language. So the question is it happening with just the teenagers or youth? Because youth, according to the UN, is from what? From 0 to 35. So I extend the age of youth to 35 this morning. I think it seemed like teenagers. So it's not just happening amongst the teenagers. So what I decided to do is really home in on what cyberbullying is. Now, you have different definitions, so I just pulled out a few. And of course, I guess from a legal perspective, that's some work that has to be done nationally to really properly define cyberbullying so that it encompasses everything and you don't limit anything. It's really the electronic use of, or electronic communication to bully a person by sending intimidating messages, threatening messages, or I would say more mean-spirited messages about a person. Sometimes it's done anonymously, other times it's not. How different is it from bullying? Because when I talk to a few people, they mention, oh, well, you know bullying, you go to school and someone slaps you or someone insults you or grabs your bag or takes your money. That's what they understand as bullying. So when I say, well, cyberbullying, have you ever been cyberbullied? I have to now further probe and ask more questions like, okay, has anyone threatened you online? Or were they extremely sarcastic, which is trolling? Did they drop a nasty comment that kind of provoked you to respond? So just this slide just covers really briefly a comparison between bullying and cyberbullying. The challenge we have with cyberbullying is it's online. So it's 24 hours a day. It's not a case where you're going to school and for the period of like 8 to 4, you have someone that's on your case and you come home to safety. The minute you're connected and you log on, it can continue and it could be repeated. So there really isn't a safe space for it. It's really extremely hard for you to escape. So you have to, as an individual, hopefully have a backbone to be able to handle some of the bullying. It's shared across a wide audience. So we know with social media and everything else, everything goes viral really quickly. And what we find that's pervading society right now are the cases of videos being taken. There was a big famous case in the Bahamas recently where you had one of the digital rising stars, singer, who happened to pose naked in front of her boyfriend. He took pictures. And of course they had an argument and he decided to share it across social media and share it. It did go through WhatsApp and everything else. And she happened to be a spokesperson for the telecom company in that country. And of course, it affected her because they pulled her contract. That's just one example. So does it happen only to young people? No. It also happens to adults, either younger adults or older people. This is just an example of something I pulled off of Facebook because I'm on Facebook, I'm part of different groups, and they have a lot of shopping groups, and I see a horrible case of fights going on Facebook, which are awful, and sometimes I wonder, well, who's really monitoring the media? This is an example just on Sunday. I just happened to go online and see someone post a picture about the airport that's being developed in St. Vincent needing 16 million. So, normal. I'm part of the Information Society. I make a comment like, oh, well, we also need to start looking at investment and so on around the airport. And here's someone that came across trolling and literally insulted me. And I'm like, look, this isn't about politics. But it wasn't about politics. The person is just the kind of person that trolls and try to provoke. So, and this is a person that isn't a teenager, an adult. So it does happen. The study found 41% said online abuse left them feeling depressed or helpless. A quarter had closed their accounts, the social media accounts. 40% said they couldn't tell their parents, so that's an issue, and I'll show a little later. And 40% said they were finding it hard to support a friend being bullied. So the challenges, I think the big challenges are lack of understanding, as I said, as to what cyberbullying is, both at the level of parents, teachers, youth, and society at large. We find there's inadequate supervision of youth and children with the devices, perhaps part of the reasons we heard earlier today about the digital divide. There's also an issue of culture. In our regional Caribbean culture, people would say plain talk. People just say what it is and take it or leave it. And that's the truth. But not everyone is going to have a backbone. And so how is internet now influencing our culture and our norms? Because, well, someone pretty much will say what it is. They say, you're fat, you're fat. It really is not an issue. But it becomes an issue when you go online. Other things, I call this the rise of the sociopath. It's really true. Society is being desensitized about different things, partly because there's inadequate positive socialization. Part of the socialization is that we're all socializing in a different manner, but there isn't enough face-to-face time and opportunities for dealing with conflict resolution and, critical decision making. So you have a society that also depends heavily on the digital media or even media in general, and they have become desensitized to a lot of things. So there is no more empathy, no sensitivity. They just say what it is. So that's one of the issues. And then other challenges, inadequate laws to protect. So just moving really quickly so I can wrap up quick. When we look at some of the root causes, we know that one explanation could be brain development. It is known that at least the prefrontal cortex of the brain generally is not developed as yet, or it develops during puberty. It develops during puberty, but it hasn't matured yet. So that's one reason you would recognize there's some impulsive behavior that goes on. I already mentioned socialization as an issue. Skills needed for decision making. Critical thinking skills, it's really a big issue. Proposed solutions, and comes to my final. You have different types of proposed solutions because not everyone is going to call or report to a parent or tell them that something is happening. So you have technology. How do you use technology to solve a problem? Here I have an example of this 15-year-old. I think her name is Trisha Prabhu. And she developed an application, which is free, by the way, Android or iOS platform, which you could download, and it actually allows you to rethink before you post. So when you're in an inflamed situation and you're about to type and you're sending out a message, it pops up and tells you, are you sure that's what you want to post? And studies have shown that at least 70% of the time people will change their mind. So that has helped. Other technology-mediated tools, like some for schools, you can use management tools that are offered. I use Custodio to monitor my team. So it's an app. It's undercover. It's on all his devices. And I open it up and I get a sense of what kind of content he's he's looking at on a day-to-day basis. And if I want to close it for study time, I can do that from the app. Needs, we need child helplines, or basically national cybercrime hotlines, which can incorporate that kind of cybercrime. Education and capacity building issues, I think there is a need for national, regional public awareness programs. One of the things I also mentioned before is lack of critical thinking skills, which points to, unfortunately, our educational systems. So we definitely need to try and encourage STEM skills to foster critical thinking. We have to encourage curriculum reform because you have to institutionalize this. Getting teachers involved is extremely important, so sensitivity training for all, including teachers as well as parents, might I add, because some parents don't really see the need or see the issue. Yeah. And then I say content is king. We definitely need to provide positive reinforcement content, and that can be done even by involving youth in problem-solving initiatives, hackathons to create solutions, and some of the other things. And lastly, the legal and regulatory framework. There's some countries that are advancing this. Australia, for example, was one of the first to implement a Cyberbullying Act, which is separate and apart from the E-Crimes Act, but it is a critical subcomponent. It covers porn, child pornography, and all of that. Also, the Electronic Consumer Protections Act, embedded to all the Information Society Acts. I remember when I was working on the Electronic Transactions Act here in St. Kitts, one of the things that upset me was we did not include electronic consumer protection because it was supposed to be incorporated in a later act. So I'm hoping, Mr. Bukasa, that this will be incorporated. And then, of course, an issue Ms. Mukasa raised was the institutions to implement, because you can put whatever you want in an act, but you have to enforce it. And that becomes comes to the last part where we talk about perhaps looking at other stakeholders, public-private partnerships, as a mechanism to create those organizations that are needed. Thank you.
The presentation you saw this morning, the video clip, was quite succinct, and I was just reading something on making your presentation memorable, so I want to leave you with a message, and the message is privacy is dead. Okay? The young lady in this story here sent an email to another young man that she had an encounter with, spent an evening with. Since all the children gone, we couldn't talk. She had an encounter with this young man, and she emailed him the following day to explain and express her gratitude and what a memorable evening it was. And he then passed it to a friend and friends, and the next thing you know, the thing reached New Zealand, you reached US, and so on. The woman went into hiding. She ran to the US, and when she got off the plane at JFK, the media was waiting for her there. So it just goes to show you that, you know, this issue of privacy and things going viral has been around for almost the dawn of technology. So this morning's presentation, the video pointed out that, you know, while you're taking precautions, you don't know what the other 1,000 or 1,600 friends that you might have on Facebook have. So, and how many of them do you actually really know? You know, you have 1,000 friends in your Facebook. Would you invite them for tea? Would you invite them for coffee? Or even for the younger folks who've gone, take them to KFC? So probably not. So why have so many people in your Facebook in the first place, right? In this age where we're encouraged to share and be friends with everybody, right? The culture of privacy has been changed. You have platform-specific friends. If you were to walk down the street where you live and just go into 5 homes randomly and ask to see people's photos of their children and so on, you know, what would be the response? You know, it wouldn't surprise you if you got to the 3rd home and the authorities are waiting to take you away because they think you're a crazy person wanting to know. But yet, we routinely post these pictures. You post what you're going to eat, you post what you're going to thinking about, you post your family's photos all over the internet. But it's not a behavior you would encourage somebody to do in the physical world, but in the cyberspace, we do these things routinely. You see, you put it, go online, you see what people are having for breakfast or whatever the case might be. Again, this morning's presentation, 100 and something or whatever friends you have. I have a handful of friends in Facebook and 300 and something network contacts in LinkedIn. And I used to be a crowd control technician at a nightclub in a former life. And we would have less people in the place, but we have a better night because I'm very selective as to who I let into the place. And so that's the same policy I operate in terms of how I manage my social media network. A statistic to think about that, only a quarter of PCs worldwide have any kind of antivirus protection. So while you're sharing with people, you don't know what device protection they have on their devices. So, and if they're not going to put even an antivirus on their PC, are they going to lock down their social media? So you might as well just post publicly, you know, because somebody, 1 in 4 of your friends, probably all their posts and your posts are probably being seen anyway. So you need to take care of what you post. People routinely post their future movements, and you're being warned about that, and their current location. Dangerous things to do, because as we've seen, you could be opening yourself to vulnerabilities. So be careful what you post. Share the memories and not the adventure. Some posts are geotagged, some photos are geotagged, so it's less of an issue perhaps for us in the Caribbean, where it's a little easier to track people down in terms of if they were to try and perpetrate a crime. But in some metropolises where you don't know what offenses certain people have done and what their motives are, you could be opening the door to vulnerabilities. Don't post personal and sensitive information. The young woman in the photo, anybody know who she is? Some of you might know. Right? That young lady was in Malaysia on top of a mountain. She was part of a backpacking group earlier this year. She went and she exposed herself. They all decided to go topless or something, and then there was an earthquake, and they thought that they'd upset the gods and put her backside in jail. Right? Because she had posted the pictures of herself on social media. So had she waited till she came back and posted the pictures, she would have been safe. But because she posted the adventure, she got another adventure. She spent a couple of nights in a Malaysian prison.